Hello, everyone, and welcome to the International Education Series, where we discuss the current state of education around the world in the wake of COVID-19. This is the fourth in a series of panels discussing the current educational situation around the world. Today, we'll be focusing on Mexico and in Brazil. This is a community conversation with the Equity and Inclusion Fellows at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in collaboration with the International Education Policy Program at HGSE and Harvard Common Spaces. You can find out more about upcoming events at Common Spaces website, commonspaces.harvard.edu. My name is Lina Lopez Lalinde. I'm a proud member of the International Education Policy Program class of 2020, and I will be the moderator for this interactive experience. Throughout our time together, I will be asking some of my own questions to our panelists, but I do welcome those of you in the audience to please submit your own questions in the chat, and I will read from those later on in our conversation. So now on behalf of the entire Harvard community, I want to welcome Eugenia Garduno, co-founder of Mujeres Unidas por la Educación, and Nicole Paulette, Director of Content at Laboratorio de Educação. So Eugenia Garduno graduated from the International Education Policy Program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in 2006 and holds a doctorate in education policy, leadership, and instructional practice, also from HGSE. She has worked at the Mexican Ministry of Public Education and as the head of the OECD Center in Mexico. She has been a lecturer at the University of Texas and head of academic affairs at el Centro de Cooperación Regional para la Educación de Adultos en América Latina y el Caribe, an international organization working on adult education in Latin America and the Caribbean. She is the co-founder of a network of women in education in Mexico, Mujeres Unidas por la Educación. Welcome, Eugenia.
Thank you so much.
Nicole Paulette Piedra serves as Director of Content at Laboratorio de Educação, a Brazilian nonprofit organization dedicated to the production of applicable education knowledge. She supervises content development and project implementation for All Children Can Learn, a mobilization program designed to support low-income families in promoting quality interactions with young children. Nicole holds a master's degree in international education policy as well from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Originally from Peru, she is an alumna of the United World Colleges movement and a graduate of Harvard College, where she completed a BA in social studies and a secondary concentration in Portuguese. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us today. So I'm just going to jump right in and go ahead and get us started with our first question, which will aim to provide us with a more general overview of your roles in this pandemic and the situations in Brazil and Mexico. So can each of you just give us a brief overview of what your work has consisted of during this time, and what are some of the unique ways that you and your organizations have been able to navigate the situation in your respective contexts? And either of you can go ahead and jump in.
Sure. I don't know. I can start if that's okay with you, Nicole?
That's great.
Great. Okay. So I just wanted to give you a brief sort of background into our organization and our work so you can understand what we're doing now, how we're doing it. So in the current context of emergency, of course. So MUPORED is Women Unite for Education, is really more like a network. It's a network of women in education in Mexico. And the word network is really important to highlight here because, as you will see later in the work I will describe, we operate in a very different way than than a more formal institutionalized organization. So our goal as a network is to create a space for dialogue, for collaboration, and also action with a framework that incorporates a gender perspective on educational topics. So we really seek to empower women by supporting equality of education opportunities for all. And we're not affiliated to political parties, movements, institutions, though we have engaged in partnerships with other organizations, mostly higher education organizations, international organizations like the UNESCO office in Mexico City, also foundations, and a couple of media outlets. So we're 125 members. We're active in education, and we're all over Mexico, even outside the borders of Mexico. So this is a very sort of flexible network, and given this flexibility, we've been able to leverage the resources and expertise of the members in the network in a very timely manner to address the urgent needs that have emerged during the pandemic. So our initiatives have been built directly from requests by teachers, families, and students. And so a request comes up and we reach out, or some of the members reach out to us, and members have expertise that it's very, very diverse and wide ranging. It's a lot of them work in academia, some of them are education policy, research and evaluation, teaching and learning, early childhood education and care. So this has really helped us a lot in terms of developing strategies that we're actually implementing now. We have, right now we have 6 projects. We have been developing a repository of content, curating educational resources in Spanish. We have developed education materials to help teachers work with parents and parents with their children at home, both in academic and social emotional skills. We have created a coaching slash mentoring program with school supervisors where we pair an expert from our network, Paulette, with a school supervisor. This program is called Compa Académico. We also have weekly dialogues. We call them education dialogues in association with Tec de Monterrey, which is one of the largest and most important private universities in Mexico. And we've done it with the leadership of another Harvard alum, Dr. Sofia Leticia Morales. We've entitled the series Learning in Difficult Times, where we're addressing topics on teaching and learning in this emergency from the perspective of teachers, students, and families. We've also been developing materials like infographics for parents and families during the pandemic. And finally, we've been writing blogs. We write about three to 4 blogs per week, documenting different voices on topics related to the pandemic. Examples are experiences of women as mothers, educators, researchers, teachers, among others, during this emergency. And we basically use social media and our own webpage to disseminate materials and provide access to educational resources, as well as the use of other networks that Paulette members belong to. And this is what I would like to say of our work, maybe expand later on, but I would like to leave. Sorry for Nicole.
Yeah. Well, so the organization that I work in, Laboratorio de Educação, prior to the pandemic, was implementing a professional development program in partnership with the municipal education departments in 5 rural areas in northeastern Brazil, in the state of Maranhão. What that work consisted on before the pandemic was of various kinds of professional development meetings and actions developed together with teachers, school supervisors, and school principals, as well as the district administrators in each of these 5 cities, specifically on early childhood education. Alongside these activities within the educational system, we were also working with social assistants and health professionals within health posts and what in Brazil are called the social assistance centers, who develop home visitation programs with low-income families. So as soon as the state government decided to suspend all of educational activities and people were recommended to stay at home, we canceled all of those in-person meetings, and we decided to take our time to understand what could be applied to the different contexts in these rural locations that have very limited access to the internet, and also to the specificities of early childhood education, in which children themselves would not necessarily be the ones expected to connect to the internet and receive content, as has been the solution for the later years. So as we explore different options, we decided to reach out to the State Department of Education, who is not responsible for delivery in early childhood, but it has a mobilizing and articulating role, trying to connect the 207 municipalities in the state that together serve around 200,000 children between 0 and 6 years of age. So the state had been very quick to respond to the crisis by producing and distributing content for early elementary, middle school, and high school students through digital and physical materials. But we did notice that their initial response included some pilot programming for early childhood education that was addressed directly to children. And we were concerned from our perspective as external actors that often partner with public institutions to help them implement their own curriculum. We identified that there were inconsistencies between the content that they were putting forth and the curriculum that has been approved in Brazil a couple of years ago, and that the states have been in charge of sort of trickling down to the local system. So we reached out in an effort to put our content and our methodology in the service of the public systems at a time in which we understood that there could be a turning point in terms of the kinds of pedagogical practices that would be legitimized in early childhood education and that are part of the traditional imaginary of what it is to learn. So there are traditional practices that I think the most recent national curriculum has been trying to provide an alternative for, but in practice, we worried that the pandemic would sort of give license to setting aside a lot of the things that we'd achieved in terms of understanding young kids as active in their own learning and needing to have experiences and not be sitting down, in front of a board and desks when they're 3 years old. So that was sort of the main problem that we thought would be exacerbated with the crisis. And so in this partnership with the state Department of Education, we decided to convert a lot of the content that we developed over the years to communicate directly with families. So parents or caregivers of children ages 0 to 6, and converted them to video and audio format in order to meet the technical requirements of the way the state was distributing content in these rural locations. And this content itself had been the result of a 2-year intervention research project we conducted in low-income communities, both in Maranhão and in the interior of São Paulo, in which our goal was precisely to figure out ways to help families of young children understand that they have a role, that this role is different from the teacher's role, but that it is very important in the learning process. And we transform these into suggestions and models for ways in which parents and caregivers could convert daily tasks and routines, such as cooking, cleaning, into opportunities to interact, to talk, and for kids to learn about their surroundings, not in a more organic way. So allowing parents to do what they can as parents and not try to deliver content in a way that they're not prepared to do. Parents are not teachers, caregivers are not teachers, and that's okay. And there is a lot that they can do within that role. So during the past 3 weeks, we've been creating these small pieces of content that have been distributed over the state social media channels, as well as different WhatsApp groups and transmissions lists, as well as public radio and television channels, to have a wider reach in a state where the main form of media that people consume is through television. So that was one way to centralize the production of content and let the municipalities focus on distribution. And that was possible because the state had a unified curriculum, so that enabled the alignment to take place at a higher level and allow the municipalities on reaching the most vulnerable families. So that's in sum what we've been doing over the past month and a half or so.
Great, thank you so much to you both for sharing. And I want to shift my next question to something that you've both touched on, which is collaborating with other educational authorities and organizations. Nicole, you talked about partnering with state authorities, and Eugenia, you also talked about partnering with other international organizations and other networks. And I'm wondering if you can expand on what that collaboration and coordination has looked like in your contexts.
Sure. I'll go now if that's okay with you, Nicole. So we can continue. And actually, oh my gosh, I just loved what you said, Nicole. I'd like to have another conversation with you separately. So really, we have not had any direct collaboration with educational authorities as Nicole's organization has, though we have been working with other non-governmental organizations and higher education institutions. So most of our resources, we've been mobilizing resources, has been sort of, this process has been more streamlined through direct contact with supervisors, teachers, and families. We really have this direct contact because our network of educators, like I mentioned, is distributed all over Mexico, and they also, each member of MUPORED has other networks. So it's really more like a grassroots kind of initiative. So what happened with us and our work is that at the beginning of the pandemic, the response of the authorities, educational authorities in Mexico, was practically non-existent. So this is where we started as a network, direct contact with teachers, with school supervisors, in the absence of this sort of governmental action. However, after a few weeks, when the Ministry of Education finally rolled out their educational continuity strategy, we did continue to support families, teachers, and communities with our weekly seminars. The weekly seminars we conduct in collaboration with Tec de Monterrey, which is, like I said, one of the top private universities in Mexico. They have sort of all the technical infrastructure. They've been helping out us with the Zoom meetings, for instance, among other things. We also continue to offer social emotional support materials with infographics that we elaborated with tips for families on how to cope with more like the anxieties and concerns regarding the education and well-being of their children and the whole family. So these materials we've been disseminating again with all social media. But another important collaboration that we've had in terms of dissemination is with other media outlets. So we have a weekly collaboration with Animal Político, who's an independent news outlet where we publish blogs by different members and of MUPORED. And again, we also have collaboration agreements with indirectly with other universities outside of Mexico City. By the way, Tecnológico Monterrey is in the north of Mexico, so that also, and they have campuses all over the country. So mostly those are, we also have other agreements with foundations. We're working with UNESCO office in Mexico, Fundación SM on conversations. We're starting to prepare for return to classes. When schools open again, we are already preparing for that scenario. So this is the collaboration we believe is a very important part of the work we do. Without collaboration, we would be able to achieve very little. Thank you.
So I would say that this early childhood initiative is an example of the kind of virtuous cycle that we hope that we are able to achieve, and that it doesn't always happen, in which a set of private actors over the course of several years enable a nonprofit organization to develop a structured methodology that in times of need can be put to use at no cost to the state authorities and within relatively short notice. And that is something that as an institution, with that premise, that is sort of our vocation, it's very difficult to sustain such an intersection of different types of action. So one of the things that this collaboration makes me think about is the importance of, I guess, walking the walk in terms of what it means to support educational innovation. institutions like us depend on private funding, and it works when it works. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up is precisely how vulnerable we are to these fluctuations, given the way the economy is working right now. We do worry that the fragilities that existed in the nonprofit sector prior to the pandemic may prevent us from continuing to provide this kind of support to the state government if our funders decide to withdraw that funding from us. So I think something that I've been thinking about lately is that what it means to support innovation in practice is very different from the way current structures allow and promote innovation in the people who are in the educational front lines. And that is certainly from the perspective of strengths and weaknesses in the system. I would say that that is a potential weakness that right now we're thankfully being able to overcome. But when I think about the time and effort that we also have to spend in educating our funders so that they recognize the value of this kind of partnership, we could be spending that time also worrying about the technical challenge or the challenges in the field. So that's definitely a tension that doesn't always align, but that it really I guess brings a little bit of complexity to what it means to collaborate and to really understand what are the expectations and the interests and the needs of the different actors, both in the public, in the private, and in our case, in the nonprofit sector. Now, with regards to our partners in the public sector, we really have relied on the leadership of the state government that has done a really great job at articulating the different situations in the municipalities. What is a challenge that we're currently facing, and we're trying to figure out ways to address those particular challenges in the municipalities, is that they do have different levels of operational, technical, and financial capacity. So we were working with 5 municipalities out of the 200 and something in the state, and we are piloting strategies ourselves that hopefully the state will be able to scale up at a certain point. So helping these municipalities put together the WhatsApp groups and obtain every family's phone number so that they can make them aware that this content exists, that it's only turning the television at that time that the programming will be on. But that is the result of an investment we've been making in kind of helping them create a data infrastructure that they didn't have, to know, how many kids are in each school, especially the rural schools, how many teachers they actually have under the supervision, what kind of support they need, what kind of access do they have to television, to radio, who needs to be called and whose door needs to be knocked on. So we're definitely learning a lot in this process, and the direct partnership with the local administrators has been very important, and the partnership and collaboration with the state authorities will also be crucial in order to learn from these experiences and have the state authorities also help other municipalities in the state reach similar levels of, I guess, impact within their own territories.
Great, thank you so much. Before I continue to my next question, I just want to remind the audience that you can go ahead and ask your own questions to our panelists as well. So if you have any questions for Nicole or Eugenia, please go ahead and put them in the chat or in the Q&A. So now I want to discuss something that I know is closer to the core of both of your work. As we all know, the tremendous demand that's being put on families in regards to supporting and continuing children's education is disproportionately high for the most vulnerable populations. So I wanted to ask if you can each talk about how you've seen this play out in your own contexts and how your organizations have worked to reach these families.
Yes, of course, I can go now. Thanks, Lina. So yeah, this is definitely an issue in our country. So most distance education strategies that are being designed are designed on the assumption that families have access to reliable internet and electronic devices. So in addition, a large portion of parents in Mexico lack sufficient academic preparation to help or support their children. But let's be fair, the demands that are being placed on families, regardless of the resources that are available to them, are massive. You know, parents, and particularly mothers, have had to become teachers, nurses, if a family member becomes ill, in addition to their regular work and home chores. And even parents with doctoral studies in education are struggling. I don't know if you saw this op-ed written by somebody who's a graduate from Hugsy. Actually, she's a professor, and she was saying, I don't have the tools to be a homeschooler. So I mean, all families are struggling in this. Just wanted to highlight this, but especially the most vulnerable ones. And of course, all the sort of like the educational intervention has been reduced to like WhatsApp and cell phone, because smart cell phones have the widest penetration everywhere, regardless of socioeconomic status. Some homes don't even have a television set, but they all have a cell phone. Maybe connectivity is really bad, but that's what it's being reduced to. So in the case of the most vulnerable populations, Mupared has prepared PDFs with educational activities that can be conducted at home, completely low tech, with low cognitive demands on parents, and integrated to home routines, similar to what Nicole was describing. Actually, I'm super interested in learning more about your materials, Nicole, if possible. I assume they're all in Portuguese, but we've been going this way, precisely given the context. So with the other program that we have, coaching program with supervisors, we're also working with disadvantaged communities and providing support in terms of not only distance education strategies, but also we kind of provide emotional support for teachers and supervisors, because they're very, very overwhelmed as well. We're thinking about emotional support for families, but supervisors need emotional support, teachers need emotional support, and this enormity of demands and stressors that are being experienced by all. So, but I also want to highlight that we really don't have enough data at this point, or enough information. We don't have enough empirical data on what is actually happening with families beyond anecdotal reports. So we started an initiative. One of the members of our network, and also a Hugsy graduate, Dr. Maria Elena Ortega, designed a survey together with other experts from the network to better understand what is happening with teachers, principals, and families in all these diverse contexts. So we really want to have information on what is happening to better support people. And we also are implementing a survey to assess if and how the educational resources that we've been developing for those vulnerable populations, whether or not they're being used and how they're being used. So that is very important feedback on what we're doing. And also, I would like to know if Nicole, in her presentation, she could also address this issue. How are you getting feedback on how people are using your materials? I would be very interested in hearing that as well. Thank you.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. And I think these are I guess what a crisis requires of everybody in the system. Has to do with flexibility, with the ability to come up with creative solutions that actually listen to what's on the other side, and that hasn't always been a priority. So I definitely think that if we don't do that now, we won't be able to truly help the families that are at most in need. So just wanted to emphasize, echoing what Eugenia said, that we are not dealing only with a digital gap, even though there is a very important gap in access to technology, to the various technologies that are being put to use in the various levels of the educational response. But there is also a gap in terms of cultural capital that families have, and in the material conditions that they can have at home in order to provide the support that children need. In our case, when it comes to children 0 to 6, we wanted to make sure that the type of demand that we would place on families would not go beyond what they already do in the home. we start from the premise that every interaction is an interaction in which children can learn, and they can learn a lot of things if the adult pays attention to what they say, to what they're interested in. So the type of suggestions that we offer, they are we try to be very careful not to give a list of tasks. It's not a programming, it's not a routine, it's not necessarily a set routine, but it's simple strategies in order to integrate children into their routine. So let's say during the time that they are folding laundry or putting laundry away, what are the various things that children can do? And what we've had is also anecdotal in terms of how families are receiving these. So we did receive some videos or responses to the WhatsApp messages sharing some of these video content of families, getting the kids to match the red sock and the other red sock. So they're relatively easy to implement, but I agree 100% that we don't have enough information to know beyond the sample, the self-selected sample that sends us all of these information. We don't know how the rest of the families are doing, and that's definitely something that we will need the local administrators and their network of principals and supervisors to monitor in a more localized way. We do know that in some of these municipalities that are very small, that is a challenge. That is a very big challenge. It was alone to have information about who their teachers were when we first started working with them. So they would need support specifically to do that. Hopefully we will be able to do that in the 5 municipalities, but definitely that'll be a challenge going forward for the state. I think with another project that's actually not this one in early childhood, we did make, we pivoted a teacher training project that we were working on in partnership with Paola Uccelli at Hugsy, in order to help teachers have some space to discuss how they're doing, what sense they're making of the situation. And we were actually so happy that we were able to intervene in a different way, to provide a safe space for teachers to sort of think about what it means to be a teacher in this time. What are the demands that are placed on them, not only from the school system, but from outside. And also to kind of take this time to reflect on what are schools here for? I mean, this situation is making everybody rethink what our education systems are there to serve, and how complex that is. And so we're reading short stories with them and having them write short stories about their memories as students, their memories as teachers. So we're coming up with an intervention that we hope will provide them with some support in navigating not only the current crisis, but also what comes afterward. But all of that, as a relatively small organization that we are, it is very difficult. We are testing some strategies in one context and not in others. So I think one of the biggest challenge, I think, is going to be to understand what kinds of initiatives exist, how they're doing, what impact they're having, and being able to learn from what we are doing, but also from what other organizations are doing, so that the institutional networks and the institutions that serve teachers, principals, and also families can incorporate what different organizations have come up with during this time.
Great, thank you so much. And that's actually a perfect segue. Oh, go ahead, Eugenia.
Yeah, Lina, sorry, it's just that I was, while I was listening to Nicole, I was also looking at the questions of the audience, and I was gonna suggest that we could maybe answer some of those before going back to the next questions, because some of them are related to the actual questions.
Yeah.
Talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I was going to go ahead and move into the audience questions, because there are some pretty good ones, and actually some that I think connect very well to what Nicole was just saying. So one actually is talking about what what will become the new normal, right? What is going to happen after this crisis is over, which you were touching on a little bit, Nicole. So I think maybe this is a great opportunity for you to expand. So the question is, since you are working to solve necessities that are only highlighted by the pandemic, how can the efforts that both have started persist after the crisis is over? Can you envision a new normal where these actions remain and could become institutionalized?
Okay, am I muted or am I on? I'm on. Well, I can go ahead and answer that. I think these are very difficult questions. I think because at the risk of being pessimistic, which I'm not, I do want to say that in spite the efforts of many individuals and organizations, such as the one that I'm working with, I really don't think that we will, the systemic problems that existed before the pandemic are going to be solved because of the pandemic. And I think that's something that we are going to need to grapple with when we face these interventions that are palliative for a very severe and traumatic shock to the system. So the same hurdles, be it political, social, economic, technical, that existed before, exist today, and they are barriers even to implement the best of ideas, and they will persist afterwards. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, even as we can recognize that there will be values or attitudes that as a society we adopt because of the pandemic. So I think that, I hope, rather than think, I hope that one of the elements that has become crucial in the pandemic, which is flexibility, trust, and autonomy of the people who are working directly with the families or with the students, that those will be regain the value that they should always have had. I think with very good intentions, in various municipalities and states in Brazil, there has been a move towards very, very strict curricula that teachers must follow, and a lot of structures intended to control, and that limits the way teachers can react to a crisis such as the one we're facing now. I think the crisis has sort of shaken things up a little bit, and we are realizing that the only ones who are going to know what their kids need are the teachers. And so we should listen to what they recognize as the main challenges that the children face, both cognitively, emotionally, socially, culturally. So there's a lot of knowledge that only teachers can bring. Only those who are directly acting with their constituencies, with the students, that they can know and that they can provide responses to. So I hope that if that as a principle can be incorporated in the way we do and formulate educational policy, that will be a change of attitude that will bring a lot of change.
Eugenia, would you like to expand or?
Yeah, I'd like to just add on to not extend too much to answer also the other questions. So in response to Paul's question, we have a very clear goal. Our agenda is way bigger than the pandemic agenda. We started to work even before that. Our goal is clear. We want to work on reducing the gender gaps, and we want to do it through education. If something, the pandemic sort of consolidated our group, it made it more cohesive, but it's very clear to us that we will continue to work on women issues, and some of the sort of structural vulnerabilities of the system were only highlighted by the pandemic, but we are going to continue working. And yes, I do think it's a challenge post pandemic, what's going to happen, because now a lot of people are pouring resources and efforts because we're in an emergency. What's going to happen post emergency? I think we are going to have to work really hard in continuing sort of that effort and working hard to keeping a focus on our original agendas. In our case, it was mainstreaming gender perspective in education. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we have another question from the audience, this from an incoming IEP member. So the question that Charlie asks is, how did your Hugsy experience prepare you to tackle the issues that have arisen because of the pandemic? What advice would you have for those trying to enter the field of international education in the midst of COVID-19? And I think you can also tie that into Aspa's question, asking just what are best practices, lessons that you've learned during this time?
So, Nicole, would you like to start or should I go? I'll go. I'll take. So, yeah, that's great questions, and I love the question from Charlie. And congratulations for starting your IEP program. Well, we'll start in August. So we're really talking about this interestingly. That what exactly? How did Harvard prepare us to sort of navigate the current emergency? And I think for me, the tools that I acquired through the IEP program and other Hugsy coursework are so helpful, not just in the emergency, just in general. They provided me and other graduates, like the women I've mentioned before, really prepared us to address a context of uncertainty with rigorous tools to better understand these challenges. Like some of the tools that I believe were particularly useful were like all the statistical courses methods. We really developed a statistical mindset to pay attention to all of these sort of patterns, laws of large numbers now. This issue that was really an issue at the beginning of the pandemic of exponential growth, those kinds of things that we really understood the need to educate the public in understanding other aspects of statistics. Also the training to keep focused on key questions and issues and not get distracted along the way. Another tool is collaboration, which we've been really talking about a lot, is collaboration skills to foster group work, where we are able to leave aside our personal goals, and this in order to reach the larger goals, common goals. Finally, for me, from my perspective, is this understanding of the world as a very dynamic and complex space where multiple variables are interacting with each other at multiple levels. There are no easy solutions. And so I think, I don't know, Ashley's question, she has like 3 questions. So maybe we can talk about, there was a question on social emotional wellness, learning, and the plan for the second round. Well, really the plan is a second round. It's more like continuing. I honestly don't think schools are going to be able to reopen in the next months. I mean, look what's happening in France. Schools opened and the illness went up, and contagions happened there in school. So really, we're going to continue doing what we've been doing, and of course, we really need feedback on if what we're doing is effective or not. In terms of social emotional wellness, through the seminars and through the coaching programs, that's how we're sort of dealing with this. And that's it for me now. Thank you.
Great. So Nicole, you can go ahead and touch on either question that you'd like. So how has Hugsy prepared you, and what tools have you found particularly useful during this time? And then also getting back more to the context of Ashley's question in regards to socio-emotional wellness and just preparing for a potential second wave of the pandemic.
Yes. Well, I first want to thank Eugenia for putting very, very articulately all these different dimensions of the learning experience at Hugsy. I agree very much with everything that you said. I guess taking on her last point, I'd say that one of the biggest, it's not a tool, but a set of premises that I think I left Hugsy with is the need to understand education as an integrated system, and that requires attention to both the macro level, but also to the micro level actions that are also part of public policy making and of policy implementation. They're not two separate things, but they're part of an integrated and dynamic system. And so that is something that I bring to my work in terms of looking at each actor within the system within their professional capacity, their motivations, their training, their expectations, so that the solutions that we create together can be sensitive to those complexities, rather than come up with a solution up here and then hope that they be carried out as expected. I will always remember Fernando Riemer saying that in a class about informed dialogue, that the truth will not set you free. And it is a very profound thing to understand, and a dilemma to recognize in our practice. It is a humbling statement that is really important to take into everything that we do, because professional and adult learning is part of educational transformation. Organizational learning is also part of educational transformation. So there is no truth out there that will change professional culture, school cultures. So I think that as a premise, that I think has enabled me and my team to look at the context and understand it from the different perspectives of those involved, in order to understand what can become a barrier for those who are going to have to carry things out in the field. So those are considerations that I always keep in mind, and that definitely are a result of the various interactions at Hugsy. In terms of the social-emotional support, I would hope that maybe what we are learning in this one particular project, that's not the early childhood project, can actually eventually transfer to the Maranhão partnership. We are still waiting to see what will happen there. There has been a lag in these rural municipalities in terms of the number of cases. So São Paulo is definitely had a different trajectory as some of the northeastern states, and within the northeastern states, the towns outside the capital. So we are actually imagining that they will have more cases a little bit later than here, and we will have to continue the work that we are doing, probably continuing to produce content and disseminate content for families, but design strategies to support educators and seek to, I guess, create those same spaces for reflection, for grappling in this context. I think it will be a challenge when we return, and it will require collaboration, not just within the school systems, but also with other kinds of professionals. I think educators have, of course, they can and they should support their students and their peers emotionally, but there are those different demands that students and professionals will face, will require a different kind of knowledge and a different kind of preparation that perhaps schools aren't themselves prepared for. So reaching out to the social assistance structures, the mental health structures will be really important, not only at the end of the pandemic, but throughout this process. So I would hope that because of the integration that we've already tried to establish in early childhood between health professionals and social workers, as well as educators, that maybe that will be a facilitator, but it's definitely something that will be in the working from now on.
Great, thank you both. So I'm going to go ahead and ask one last audience question, and then I'll wrap up with one of my own questions. And I think this relates back to what you were just saying about collaborations, Nicole. And I don't know if either of you feel particularly equipped to answer this question, but it's regarding collaboration with higher education institutions. So the question is, how can higher education institutions assist with community work, and how could global partnerships potentially support initiatives? So in terms of, research, anything like that, that you feel you can answer.
I don't know if Nicole or yeah, it's the same. Also, okay, since Tec de Monterrey was mentioned, we're actually working with Tec de Monterrey. Yeah, definitely, this is a great opportunity for higher education. Actually, our best partners are higher education institutions, and a lot of the members in our network are faculty members at these institutions, or administrators, or higher level officials, and like I mentioned, the work with dialogues, weekly dialogues we have, it's through the collaboration of Tec de Monterrey and with the experts that many of them are faculty members. And of course, we are definitely going to continue with that and looking for more international collaboration. And also, we're all about partnerships and leveraging all the resources, and especially, you know, the IEP network. It's so strong. Fernando has worked so hard to really strengthen this network. It's a network that we should all rely on and leverage all the resources from the network as well. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just to add that we would love to have collaboration with universities. We are a nonprofit that was born out of different partnerships with professors at the University of Barcelona. We have this several year-long partnership with Paola, conducting different kinds of research. And I think in this particular time, it would be very helpful to have different perspectives, contribute to a dimension of the work that, as a very small team, we are not always either focus on content development and implementation, especially in this particular moment, or into developing the research structure that we would need in order to do an adequate monitoring of the activities that we're conducting. So I definitely would welcome, and I think people at Laboratorio would definitely welcome a partnership with individuals or with organizations. We actually had, for the prior iteration of this program in early childhood, we had 3 students from the IEP program in the monitoring and evaluation class do an analysis of the monitoring system we developed. So that was very productive, and it would definitely be helpful in this context as well.
Great. I hope something can come out of that. So I'm going to wrap it up with one last question that I hope will lead us on a more optimistic path. So I'm wondering if you guys can share what opportunities for innovation and change you've seen during this pandemic. And in other words, just what are you hopeful coming out of this?
So should I start? Okay.
Sure, yes.
Okay. So we really, the opportunities we've seen, we really learned in this context the importance of preparedness and have deeper awareness of the vulnerabilities of our systems, not just education, financial systems, even biological systems, among others. So hopefully this awareness and what we are experiencing now will allow us to be more proactive in terms of addressing key issues that are being exposed now in the pandemic, like extreme inequality, poor access to basic infrastructure, lack of support mechanisms for families and teachers, among others. And I'd also really like to touch on one of the points that Nicole mentioned before, the importance of innovation. You know, this is a critical turning point that we're seeing now, is that in emergency context, grassroots organizations and distributed initiatives are key in providing initial responses to emergencies. And so bureaucratic institutions are not typically prepared to address uncertainty and emergencies, but we do see that organizations that embrace innovation quickly and that are flexible will be at the forefront. And though the near future is still uncertain, it is clear also we will not be able to go back to the status quo. And this is important. It's a time for us to reflect and to provide more innovative solutions. Thank you.
Well, one of the aspects of the situation that I am hopeful for is that specifically when it comes to early childhood education, we are working very hard to give visibility to the informal learning experiences, and seeking to help both society recognize the crucial role that we all play in a child's educational experience, that learning doesn't take place in schools alone, that of course, the family, the immediate family, but also the neighbors, the surrounding, the people who surround children at every level are important actors in their learning process. So in providing, so we want society to recognize that, and we are hoping to give visibility to that, but also to help parents recognize that they don't need to themselves be avid readers. They don't even have to have completed formal schooling in order to play an important role in children's lives. And that's something that we understood from the various pilots that we did of this program. Sometimes families of young children associate learning with formal schooling, and going to school with your notebook and your pencil and copying things, and they think that because they themselves did not complete a certain level of education, that they cannot play a role. And what we are trying to help them see at this point is that they already play a role, and that what they do makes a big difference, and if they could do more of it and do it with intentionality, that can have a long-lasting impact in children's lives. So one thing that I would hope for is for parents to feel empowered in that way, to recognize that they don't need to do extraordinary things in order to have an extraordinary impact on children, but also for schools and school systems to recognize that they have a role to play in making those families feel supported, that families don't need to know it all beforehand. And because sometimes that is a source of conflict within the school system, that parents expect families to already know what to do. And that part of the learning that needs to take place is schools sharing what they hope that children learn, and providing families with support, and also learning about what families already do, learn about what families care about, what kinds of routines they conduct with children, especially at this young age. That is crucial for those two main contexts to work together. So that's where my hopes are for the end of this pandemic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was so beautifully articulated. And so we just have 2 minutes left in our discussion. So I would love to give both of you the chance to say a final remark if you wish, before I go ahead and close it myself.
Thank you. I just want to thank you, Lina. Thank you, Ashley, and all the Harvard students for organizing this amazing series of conversations where you're also trying out different tools, different interventions, and this you wouldn't have experienced in a normal circumstance, and this is great. I think that one of the things that this crisis is bringing out is democratizing access and distribution of expertise, of knowledge, of sharing, of collaboration. We wouldn't be doing this in a normal context. So in a way, although it's hard, I really appreciate that it's giving us this opportunity to do this kind of work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this has reminded me of all the various experiences at Hugsy in which discussing with peers, with people who Fernando, happened to know that were in town and could bring a different perspective about the work. And that is always so enriching and thought-provoking. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to hear the questions, to be able to answer to the extent that I can within this the piece that I contribute to, but also learn about Eugenia's work and about what they're doing. It's always great to connect. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. So on behalf of the entire Harvard community, again, we want to just say thank you to you both for your insight, for your leadership, and for the opportunity to connect with both of you in this space. And for everyone in the audience, I just want to thank you so much for joining and for your participation. Be sure to check out our final events in the International Education Series. Tomorrow we will be focusing on Kenya. So thank you so much and have a wonderful night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lina.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.